picture this, right? It's August 28th, 1963.
Oh, the March on Washington.
Exactly. Hundreds of thousands of people are gathered at the Lincoln Memorial. The energy is just electric.
The whole world is watching.
Yeah, the whole world. But before the famous speeches begin, before, the music swells, the crowd is asked to do something really unexpected.
Right.
They are asked to stand in absolute silence, and they're honoring a man who had died the very day before, an ocean away in Ghana.
Mm-hmm.
That man was W.E.B. Du Bois. His 95-year life literally bridged the gap from, the raw aftermath of the Civil War.
Yeah.
All the way to the absolute peak of the civil rights movement.
It's just a profoundly striking image, isn't it? I mean, the seminal moment of the American civil rights movement is happening right there.
Yeah.
And the intellectual godfather of that very movement has just passed away on a different continent.
Effectively in exile.
Yeah, basically in exile.
So for this deep dive, you sent us a truly fascinating stack of sources. I mean, we've got everything from original sociological neighborhood maps drawn in the 1890s to essays on global imperialism, right down to his declassified FBI files.
It's quite the archive.
It really is. And the mission you've given us today is to track how this, meticulous, dapper, data-driven scholar evolved into a fierce, relentless activist.
Right, and then ultimately into this radical global thinker who completely reshaped sociology and the fight for human rights.
Exactly. So where do we start? Because looking through the biographical notes in your stack, what stands out immediately is how his origins, they run completely counter to the typical narrative of that era.
They really do. I mean, he wasn't born in the Reconstruction South, which surprises a lot of people. He was born in 1868 in Great Barrington, Massachusetts.
Right, which was a relatively tolerant, integrated, mostly white northern town.
Exactly. And looking at the ancestry records you provided, his background is this vivid tapestry. He descends from a freed Revolutionary War veteran and a French-American great-grandfather of Huguenot origin, which basically means a lineage of French Protestants who had fled religious persecution.
Right. And in Great Barrington, he played with white schoolmates. His teachers recognized his brilliance super early on.
Yeah, they really championed him.
To the point where, when it was time for college, his childhood church congregation actually pooled their money together to pay his tuition.
And that specific environment, that early support, is so crucial to understanding the foundation of his worldview.
How so?
Well, because his intellect was recognized and rewarded in his youth, he developed this profound, almost absolute faith in education and reason.
Oh, I see.
He basically operated on the assumption that if a person could empirically prove their intellectual worth, society would naturally just make space for them.
Right. But then he goes to college. He heads south to attend Fisk University, which is a historically black college in Tennessee. And experiencing that level of severe culture shock, going from tolerant Massachusetts to the codified violent racism of Jim Crow Tennessee in the 1880s, I mean, that could easily break someone.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like stepping through a portal into this hostile dystopian reality. So how did he process that trauma intellectually?
He weaponized it.
Right.
I mean, he saw firsthand the brutal degradation of black life down there, the voter suppression, the constant threat of convict leasing, and of course, lynchings.
Right.
But rather than retreating, he doubled down on his belief in academic excellence. This specific violent contrast is actually what forged his foundational concept of the talented 10th.
I saw that term all over these early essays in the sources. What was the actual mechanism behind the talented 10th?
So he argued that for any marginalized community to rise out of systemic oppression, they needed a vanguard.
A vanguard?
Yeah, a talented 10th of highly educated, liberal arts trained leaders who could advocate for the masses. Write the literature, argue the court cases, build the institutions.
They're not just basic schooling.
Exactly. Yeah. He believed you couldn't just train people for manual labor. You had to cultivate philosophers and statesmen if you wanted to fight an intellectual war.
And he definitely embodied that vanguard himself, right? I mean, he becomes the first African-American to earn a PhD from Harvard.
Which is an incredible achievement.
And then he gets a fellowship to study at the University of Berlin. Over in Germany, he's traveling Europe, studying under these prominent social scientists, and he's being treated as an absolute intellectual peer.
Yes, that European trip is pivotal. He even deeply impresses the legendary sociologist Max Weber.
Really? Max Weber?
Yeah. Weber actually cites Du Bois as living proof to counter the prevailing pseudoscience of black inferiority back then.
Wow. So he experiences the absolute heights of European intellectual acceptance, and then he has to return to the depths of American racial hostility.
Exactly. But now he's armed with the finest sociological training in the world. He comes back entirely convinced that racism is simply a byproduct of ignorance.
And in the late 19th century, the academic consensus was that ignorance could be cured with empirical data, right?
Precisely. If you just show them the numbers, they'll understand.
Which brings us to the data phase. Looking at these incredible neighborhood maps from 1896 in your sources, he goes to Philadelphia and conducts the very first scientific sociological case study of a Black community in the U.S.
The Philadelphia Negro.
Yes, the Philadelphia Negro. And he isn't just writing essays in a library, he's going door to door. But I'm curious, how did mapping a neighborhood actually challenge the systemic racism of the 1890s?
Basically by changing the variable of blame.
Mm.
At the time, mainstream society pointed to crime and poverty in Black neighborhoods and argued, well, this is proof of inherent racial flaws.
Right, blaming the people.
Exactly. But Du Bois used strict door-to-door demographic mapping to prove that crime and poverty were the direct mathematical results of systemic exclusion.
Ah, employment discrimination, segregation.
Yes, he was effectively birthing modern urban sociology. He proved that the environment, not the race, created those conditions.
That is brilliant. And he takes this even further at the 1900 Paris Exposition, right?
The infographics.
Yes. He and his students create these dazzling modernist infographics. I was looking at the copies and the sources. Vibrant hand-drawn charts and graphs showing the increase in Black property ownership and literacy since the end of slavery.
And he actually wins a gold medal for it.
A gold medal. It's so brilliant. But then, and this is where the story shifts, the data isn't enough. In 1899, an event happens that just completely shatters his belief in the power of pure science.
The lynching of Sam Hose.
Yeah.
It was horrific.
Yeah.
Sam Hose was an African-American man who was tortured and murdered by a massive white mob near Atlanta.
And the sources say Du Bois was actually on his way to discuss it, right?
Yeah, he was walking to a newspaper office to meet with an editor. He fully intended to sit down and discuss the facts of the case logically, using reason.
Right.
But on his way there, he saw Hose's burned knuckles displayed in a storefront window.
Oh my God, I can't even fathom the psychological impact of that exact moment.
It changed everything for him.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. It's like he spent his entire life building this flawless, incredibly detailed spreadsheet to cure a disease, right? Only to look up and realize the hospital was actively being burned to the ground. Like, he had to drop the spreadsheet and become a firefighter. He couldn't just be an accountant anymore.
That is a perfect analogy. The limitations of his entire worldview became devastatingly clear in that single moment on the street.
Wow.
He realized, and this is in his own words,
Yeah.
that one could not be a calm, cool, and detached scientist while Negroes were lynched, murdered, and starved.
Because the data didn't matter to the mob.
Exactly. The empirical data was being ignored by those in power because the system was operating exactly as it was designed to.
Right.
He realized the cure wasn't simply telling people the truth. It was forcing them to act on it.
So if proving Black humanity through data didn't work because the system was, intentionally deaf, what tool does he reach for next? Like, how does he force them to listen?
Well, he turns to ideological warfare. And the really interesting part is that his first major target isn't actually the white establishment.
Right.
It's the most powerful Black leader in America at the time, Booker T. Washington.
The architect of the Atlanta Compromise. I was reading the breakdown of Washington's strategy in these notes. He essentially struck an unwritten deal with Southern white leaders. What was the actual mechanical compromise being made there?
Washington's approach was strictly accommodationist. The mechanism of the compromise was to trade civil rights for physical safety and basic economic survival.
No survival.
Yeah. Washington told Black Americans to temporarily submit to segregation, give up demands for voting rights, and focus entirely on industrial education.
Like learning trades, farming, manual labor.
Exactly. The theory was that economic independence had to come first, and then civil rights would naturally follow once Black Americans proved their economic utility.
But for Du Bois, who, as we just saw, realized that truth without aggressive action is powerless, that must have sounded exactly like surrender.
Oh, he completely rejected it. He refused to bargain away basic human rights. He insisted on full civil and political rights. Immediately.
No compromises.
None. And to make his case, he drops an absolute literary bomb in 1903, his masterpiece, The Souls of Black Folk.
Yes.
This is the book where he writes the famous line, "The problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line."
Such a famous quote. And he also introduces this profound psychological framework in that book called double consciousness, right?
Yes. He defines double consciousness as the sensation of constantly looking at oneself through the eyes of a hostile society. It is the psychological burden of two-ness, being both an American and a black person, two souls, two unreconciled strivings in one dark body.
You know, thinking about what this means for you, the listener,
Yeah.
today is double consciousness. Essentially like carrying two separate cultural passports.
How do you mean?
Well, like, you're a citizen on paper, but society constantly acts as a border patrol, always reminding you that you're an outsider and never fully allowing you to unpack your bags in either country.
Yes. The weight of carrying those two passports is exactly what drove his philosophy.
It sounds exhausting.
It is. But what the Souls of Black Folk did was invent a whole new racial uplift ideology. It told African Americans that this double consciousness wasn't just a burden.
It wasn't.
No, it afforded them a deeper, clearer insight into the true, hypocritical nature of American democracy. They understood the country better than it understood itself.
Wow. Okay, so to put this assertive ideology into practice, he starts building institutions. In 1905, I see in your notes, he helps found the Niagara Movement. Why the Niagara Movement?
Well, literally because they physically met near Niagara Falls.
Oh, I see.
Actually, on the Canadian side, because the hotels on the American side were segregated.
Of course they were.
Right. But they chose the name because they wanted a mighty current of change. They drafted a manifesto demanding full manhood suffrage and the abolition of all caste distinctions based on race.
And that mighty current eventually evolves into the NAACP in 1909.
Exactly. Du Bois becomes the director of publicity and research.
And he launches their monthly magazine, The Crisis. And according to the sources, The Crisis becomes an absolute powerhouse. Circulation reaches 100,000 by 1920.
Which is massive for that era.
Truly. And he isn't just writing opinion pieces from a desk. When a mentally impaired teenager named Jesse Washington is horrifically lynched in Waco, Texas in 1916, Du Bois sends investigators undercover.
Yeah, the Waco Horror Report.
Right. He publishes the investigation with actual photographs. He is using investigative journalism to force the nation to look at the brutality it's desperately trying to ignore.
He's making them see the fire. And he also organizes massive physical protests, like the 1917 Silent Parade down Fifth Avenue in New York.
I saw pictures of that in the stat.
Nearly 10,000 African Americans marched in complete silence, accompanied only by the sound of muffled drums. It was to protest the horrific East St. Louis riots.
He is effectively building the modern blueprint for civil rights protesting.
He really is. He becomes the preeminent voice of resistance.
But, okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Looking at the timeline, we hit World War I, and he makes a decision that seems to contradict literally everything he's built.
Ah, yes. The Close Ranks editorial.
Yeah. He writes an editorial urging Black Americans to set aside their grievances and fully support the war effort. Given his deep structural understanding of American racism, how did he justify telling Black Americans to go shed blood for a country that was actively lynching them? It seems like a massive strategic blunder.
It was an immense geopolitical gamble, and one that honestly drew furious criticism from other Black leaders at the time.
I bet.
Du Bois had theorized that World War I would ultimately overthrow the European colonial system and liberate people of color worldwide.
Okay, so he's looking at the global chessboard.
Exactly. He struck a desperate bargain. He believed that showing absolute loyalty, fighting bravely for the flag in Europe, would create a moral debt so massive that America would just be forced to grant full citizenship upon their return.
Oh, wow. But the reality of what happened when those soldiers returned in 1919 is chilling.
Yeah. They weren't greeted with equality, they were greeted with the Red Summer.
Which was a horrific series of race riots and lynchings across over 30 American cities, right?
Over 30 cities, white mobs, fueled by resentment over labor competition, and, frankly, threatened by the new confidence of returning Black veterans, just violently attacked Black communities.
And the U.S. government?
They largely looked the other way. The moral debt that Du Bois banked on was entirely ignored.
Man, the brutal betrayal of that bargain must have radicalized him even further.
It did. He realizes that integrating into this system might be impossible if the system itself fundamentally relies on racial exploitation.
So he broadens his scope. He looks back at the mechanics of American history itself. In 1935, he publishes Black Reconstruction in America.
A monumental text.
Up until this point, mainstream historians pushed a narrative that the Reconstruction era after the Civil War was a corrupt disaster, basically because Black people were quote-unquote unfit for democracy. What was the academic engine driving that false narrative?
It was driven primarily by the Dunning School, named after William Archibald Dunning at Columbia University.
Right.
They essentially trained a generation of historians to weaponize academia. They framed slavery as a somewhat benign, paternalistic institution.
Which is wild.
It's pure propaganda. And they taught that giving black men the vote during Reconstruction resulted in corrupt, disastrous state governments. They basically provided the academic justification for Jim Crow laws.
Wow. And how did Black Reconstruction mechanically dismantle that?
By simply presenting the buried evidence of black agency. Du Bois showed that the integrated legislatures of the Reconstruction South actually established the region's first public school systems.
Really?
Yeah, and the first social welfare programs. He proved that the failure of Reconstruction wasn't due to black ineptitude, but rather a deliberate, violent, and economically motivated backlash by white supremacists.
Coupled with the federal government's failure to actually distribute land.
Exactly.
But mainstream white historians practically ignored the book for decades, right? Even though today it's considered foundational.
They completely marginalized it at the time, yes.
But he didn't stop at just rewriting history. He was looking for global alternatives to Western hegemony. And in your sources covering his 1936 trip around the world, he developed some highly controversial views that are, well, pretty tough to reconcile today.
Yeah, the 1936 trip gets very complicated.
Right, because in Germany, he is absolutely horrified by the Nazi treatment of the Jewish people. He literally compares it to the African slave trade. Yet he simultaneously praises their economic recovery. And then he visits Imperial Japan. He sees their violent expansion and colonialism in Manchuria through a remarkably benevolent lens. Like, he views them as a necessary antidote to Western imperialism.
Yes.
How could someone whose entire life was dedicated to dissecting racial oppression in America view Imperial Japan's aggressive imperialism through such rose-colored glasses?
It really highlights the blinding nature of viewing global politics through a single lens. By the 1930s, Du Bois was so desperate to break the global monopoly of white, European, and American imperialism that he operated heavily on the enemy of my enemy is my friend mentality.
I see.
He saw the world almost exclusively through the color line. Japan was a non-white nation successfully challenging Western military and economic dominance.
So his profound desire to see that white imperial grip broken created these massive blind spots regarding the brutal realities of Japanese colonialism against other Asian nations.
Exactly. He saw a structural counterweight to white supremacy, and that primary focus obscured the localized suffering they were causing.
It's a striking reminder for anyone studying history that even the most brilliant analytical minds can develop severe blind spots when pushed to desperation.
Absolutely.
And that intense anti-imperialist focus only sharpens as we enter his radical final act. Following World War II, the Cold War sets in. Du Bois becomes a vocal, uncompromising peace activist.
Yes, and he is heavily critical of American capitalism, which he now views as the mechanical root cause of global poverty and racism.
And because he associates with socialist and communist sympathizers, the U.S. government puts a massive target on his back.
We enter the era of McCarthyism. The FBI had actually been building a file on him for decades at this point.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In 1950, he becomes the chair of the Peace Information Center, which was an organization circulating an international petition to ban all nuclear weapons.
Okay. Sounds reasonable enough.
Well, the U.S. Justice Department demands the organization register as an agent of a foreign state. Du Bois refuses, and so, at the age of 83, the man who practically birthed the modern civil rights movement is indicted, handcuffed, and put on trial.
Handcuffed at 83. That's just the NAACP, the very organization he helped found. They distanced themselves from him, right? Terrified of the anti-communist backlash.
They completely turned their backs on him.
He's facing real prison time. But I loved this part of the notes you sent. Looking at the trial notes, the person who steps up to be his character witness is Albert Einstein.
Yes. Albert Einstein.
I mean, it's like the government tried to isolate Du Bois in a soundproof room, and Einstein essentially swooped in and handed him a megaphone that the whole world could hear. It's the ultimate historical superhero crossover event.
It is a remarkable intervention. Einstein himself was a Jewish refugee who saw deep, terrifying parallels between American segregation and European anti-Semitism.
Right.
And he greatly respected Du Bois. When the defense attorney informs the judge that Dr. Albert Einstein has officially offered to appear as a character witness, the judge just dismisses the case.
Just like that.
Just like that. Having the world's most famous scientific genius on the stand defending a black radical would have been an unmitigated international public relations disaster for the United States government.
Oh, I bet. But the government doesn't just let it go, do they?
No, they don't.
They confiscate his passport and hold it for 8 years. He is essentially trapped in a country that treats him as an enemy of the state.
Yeah.
And, you know, this era of his life is often completely glossed over in high school history classes. Like, we hear about the Souls of Black Folk, but the textbooks conveniently leave out his run for Senate on the American Labor Party ticket, or his praise for the Soviet Union.
It's sanitized. Because a radicalized anti-capitalist Du Bois is deeply uncomfortable for the traditional progressive American narrative.
Right.
His turn toward communism in his later years wasn't necessarily about strict ideological purity.
What was it about then?
It was a pragmatic, deeply cynical rejection of a capitalist system that he believed fundamentally required an underclass to function. He felt that America in its current economic form was just irredeemable.
Wow.
In 1961, at the age of 93, the Supreme Court upheld the law requiring communists to register with the government. In sheer outrage, and as an act of ultimate defiance, he officially joined the Communist Party.
At 93, he decides he's completely done. In 1961, he accepts an invitation from President Kwame Nkrumah to move to the newly independent nation of Ghana.
Yes, to manage the creation of an Encyclopedia Africana.
Right. He and his second wife, Shirley Graham Du Bois, moved to Accra. And when the U.S. refuses to renew his passport in 1963, he makes the ultimate symbolic gesture. He officially becomes a citizen of Ghana.
He basically closes the book on his American life. He lives out his final 2 years in Africa, working on the encyclopedia, surrounded by the reality of a liberated post-colonial African nation.
Which was a reality he had dreamed of, right?
Yeah.
Having organized Pan-African congresses across the globe for decades to achieve exactly this kind of sovereignty.
Exactly. It was a culmination of his life's work.
Which brings us back to where we started. He passes away on August 27, 1963. The very next day, hundreds of thousands stand in silence at the March on Washington.
Yeah.
And just 1 year later, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is passed, enacting so many of the legal protections he spent a lifetime strategizing for.
It's a legacy of immense, just undeniable weight. But looking at your sources, we also have to remember the humanity of the man behind that towering legacy.
Oh, for sure. He wasn't just a political force. He was a person with distinct, very rigid habits.
Absolutely.
I read that the man literally mapped out his life goals on large pieces of graph paper.
He did.
He woke up exactly at 7:15 a.m.,
Right.
worked until 5:00 p.m., read his newspaper, and was in bed by 10:00 p.m. without fail.
He was meticulous.
He walked with a cane, sported this meticulously groomed goatee, and God forbid anyone mispronounced his name.
Right. He unfailingly insisted on being addressed as Dr. Du Bois, with the accent heavily on the last syllable.
Du Bois. Those quirks paint a picture of a man who demanded respect in a world that constantly, systematically tried to strip it away from him.
Yeah, his insistence on structure, his immaculate dress, his exact pronunciation. It was an armor of dignity that he wore every single day.
It really was. We've tracked his journey through your sources today, from a hopeful, data-driven student in Massachusetts to a fiery editor in New York mapping out the blueprint for civil rights, and finally to a radical expatriate in Ghana building an encyclopedia for a liberated continent.
It's an incredible arc.
It leaves a profound contradiction for you to chew on, though. Considering his ultimate disillusionment with the United States, a nation he spent nearly a century trying to save from its own worst impulses and deepest racial hypocrisies. What does it truly say about the health of a democracy when its greatest, most insightful critic decides that the only way to finally find peace is to leave it behind forever?
It is a haunting question. It forces us to ask whether a society is willing to actually listen to the fire alarms, or if it will simply let the hospital burn.
Exactly. Something for you to mull over as you look at the world around you today. Thank you for providing the incredible sources that fueled this journey through the life of an absolute titan. You've been listening to A Deep Dive. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.